while I would encourage everyone to really practice their drawing skills and their freehand drawing, there are times when you need a little bit of help. If you are increasing the size of your drawing from your reference, from a photo or a drawing you've already done, and you need to really change the size of it, that can be tricky. Or if you're doing a portrait and you really need to get a very accurate likeness. And if you're changing the scale of things, you can't just use tracing paper, carbon paper, or a light box. You need something a bit more. You could use a projector, but that's an expensive bit of kit. So the gridding method, either called grid transfer method, gridding up, whatever, is a great thing to use. It's really straightforward as long as you apply a little bit of logic. My name's Liz Chadderton. I'm a professional artist based in Berkshire. Every week I bring a tip or trick that I wish I'd known about ages ago. And this week it's all about gridding up. Of course you could just draw lines onto your photo to prepare it, but let me show you how easy it is to use this free app. First select your photo. I'm doing this on an iPad, but it's just the same on a laptop. Then you can see that it applies a grid, but those might be a bit small for you. You can decide that, and you can just change the size of the squares very easily by sliding the slider left or right. So once you've got squares that you like, you can just leave that, and then you can decide on the thickness of those lines if you can't see them enough. Trouble is, if you do them really thick, then it obscures a lot of your photo. So I would keep it down to 2 or 3 pixels. I'm just showing you this for dramatic effect. Anyway, once you're happy with the size and the thickness, you might want to change the colour. This is a slightly tricky bit. It defaults to white. You need to use the hex colour. So 000060 is black. As I say, default colour is white. If you do FF0000, I'll put all this in the description, but that would turn it red. If there's a particular colour you want your lines to be in, you just need to Google the hex colour for them. So it's very straightforward. When you're happy with your grid lines, select how you want to export the image. I'd suggest a JPEG, and then hit Save Image. It'll ask if you want to download it. You'll say yes, and it'll download it. You can see that the lines are very accurate, and so much more accurate than if you were using a pencil and a ruler. I've printed out my gridded up photo just because I thought it would be easier for us to see like this. But of course, if you've got a tablet or computer that you're happy to work from, then leave it on the screen. The first thing I just want to say about gridding up is that you can only grid up in proportion. I have seen people try the gridding up method. So they've got a photo, and the piece of paper they're trying to grid up onto is in totally different proportions to the original photo, and they get themselves really confused. We can only expand, or indeed contract if you want to go smaller, in proportion to the photo. And what I mean is, if we put it in the corner and line it up, if we go diagonally through the photo like this, corner to corner, let's actually draw it up there just to make this, and I'm ignoring that little white border just where it hasn't all printed off. Just get that right. If we put a straight line up there and a straight line across, this little rectangle is absolutely the same proportions as our photo, so that to that edge is the same. Let's extend this line right to the top and do a line down there. So this big rectangle that you can not see in totality on the camera is in the same proportions as our source photo, and this is spare. So if I had this big piece of paper and thought, oh, I'll do this chap on here using the gridding method, I can only extend this photo up to here. Just be aware of doing that diagonal and making sure your end paper is in the same proportions as your source photo. So we've got our gridded up photo, but we have to grid up our piece of paper or canvas or whatever we're doing, and you need to decide how many squares across that you want to do. So I'm just going to do this guy's head, and I'm going to number off the squares. You don't have to do this in reality, it's just I thought for demonstration that would be the best bet. So if it's just his head, he is 13 squares wide and he is 18 or 19 squares deep. We now know that we need to do on our end piece of paper 13 squares by 19. And to work out the size of your squares, you would measure the width, divide by those numbers, and it would give you the size that you have to draw your squares. And they have to be squares. You can't then measure the depth of your paper, divide by 19 and come to a different number and think, oh, I'll do rectangles. Because if you remember, I showed you with that diagonal, it's all got to be in proportion. If there's squares on here, there's got to be squares on your end paper. And you might be shouting at your computer at the moment saying, I'm not stupid, that's blindingly obvious. I promise you, I have seen people try to grid up with rectangles on their paper when they've got squares on their photo. I promise I've seen it. You might find, if you are going to get confused, that it is helpful to number your squares on your end piece of paper or canvas. And maybe if it's the first time you've done it, why not? Just if that saves a little bit of confusion. So I'm just numbering them down, and this will prove whether I've managed to count properly. Okay, so I have 13 across, 19 down. Phew! You can see that I've penciled them in, and of course I would suggest doing these pencil grid lines as light as possible because you're going to have to rub them out afterwards. I'm going to start by doing the outline of his hair, and we just have to very logically work our way across so that we don't get confused. So we'll count this as square 1 here. So square 1 nothing, square 2 nothing, square 3 nothing, square 4 nothing, square 5 nothing, square 6 we've got a bit of hair there, just the top of his hair. Square 7, the top of his hair there. Now if we look at square 8, that is empty, but the one beneath it, the hair sort of line crosses a little more than halfway up the square, so that's good. Then it comes over to about here. The next square down, it actually crosses about halfway there. It carries on down to here, and then it sort of almost goes back on itself. So he's got a spiky bit of hair, just making sure this is all on camera, which is a bit odd. And then we go down there. It comes right to where those lines cross. So I just repeat the lines over here so that they are identical. And then here it goes down, and then it goes straight. Then it comes in a bit, and we've got to go out to his ear, which then sticks out and is about halfway through that final square. Then we can see here it's about a third of a way along the line, so we're going to have to bring that ear in just to the right of this line so it can go there. His jacket sort of starts, his jacket goes to just to the left of that line there. Why don't I come back to this ear, because that's quite an easy way to find our way there, and we can just sort of put in a little bit of that hairline. I won't come into the details of the ear just at this point. And we could work across to get to the eye. So we know we've got that hairline, and then in the next square we've got some of his crow's feet. So we might just indicate those in. Might have to check the placement of those, but we know we've got his crow's feet. The next square, we're looking at where the features cross the lines and they go on to there. So his eye, the inside of his eye is there. The top of his eye is actually right on that grid line there. So his eye is that sort of size and shape. Looks quite big to me, but that is correct. So his iris stops about halfway through that one, and it's there. So you would need to do the whole picture just really logically, working your way through, and if you get confused about where you are, stop, find out where you are and start again. So like the lines under his eyes, one of them crosses the line there and goes to there, so that's that sort of direction, and then it goes up here, and now we've got his eye in place. Now you can be as accurate as you want and really careful with this, or you can start to interpret and get more flowing lines. That is your choice. What I'm going to do is carry on drawing this, but I'll put it on a time lapse so that you don't have to watch every painful line being drawn, and we'll see what he looks like at the end. Right, give or take, I have got the main elements of this chap's face in, and then comes the painful part where all those grid lines that you carefully penciled in need to be taken out. Obviously, if you're gridding up to paint with acrylics or oils, that's fine, with something opaque that will cover the lines up, no problem. But if you're doing watercolour, pencil, something transparent where they'll show up, then I'm afraid they've all got to be erased. So it is just a case of being very patient, being gentle so that you don't scuff your paper, and erasing those lines. And you can obviously see why it's so important to make sure that they're pale in the first place. Don't let gridding be a substitute for using your common sense and using your artistic sense. So if something looks a bit weird on your gridding, double check it, make sure you're happy. It's almost inevitable that your grid line will actually obscure a little bit of detail, so you'll go back to your original photo without the lines, but this will place all the features in the right proportions and in the right place. And especially if you're blowing up a relatively small photo to a large canvas, a large sheet of paper, this can be incredibly helpful. When you've done it, do the usual sensible checks of putting it in the distance, looking at it from, you know, a good way away so that you can judge proportions and make sure things are looking good. If you've got any doubts, look at it in a mirror to see it backwards, because that really helps. But that is gridding, and it is a really useful method, particularly when you're doing a dramatic enlargement, or you've really struggled to get your initial drawing right and you just simply cannot face drawing it for a second time on your paper or your final canvas. Then gridding can be a perfect way of transferring.